Hey everyone, Pink Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd. And it's time for a review, a classic review in fact, of the 1996 Outkast album, ATLiens. Legendary Georgia hip-hop duo Outkast, Big Boy, Andre 3K. We are reviewing their sophomore album right here on the channel. A little bit of context. This thing comes out a few years after the release of Outkast's first full-length album, Southern Playlistic Cadillac Music, which was an important album for Outkast, not an obscure album for the duo, a record that broke them. However, it was very much steeped in sounds that were trendy for the time that this album was released. There was a huge G-Funk vibe on this record. You could tell that Andre 3K, Big Boy, and Organized Noise, who handled a lot of the production on this record, were hugely influenced by like Dr. Dre's The Chronic and just G-Funk from the West Coast in general. Outkast was still developing their sound, and so was much of the South around this time. Sure, you had prominent artists from places like Houston, such as the Ghetto Boys and Scarface, but even these artists were hugely influenced by what was going on the West and East Coast around this time. It wouldn't be until a little later where you had these seminal Southern artists that not only dropped classics such as UGK and, also like 3 6 Mafia and 8 Ball and MGG, but ATLiens, which dropped 20 years ago this year, was a deviation point, not only for Southern hip-hop in general, but for Outkast, an important deviation point. A record that, while it wasn't as loaded with hits as Aquemini or Stankonia, definitely not as punchy or as hard-hitting as those records, this is the album where Andre 3000 and Big Boy really start to come into their own. On the production here, we have Organized Noise, who handled a bulk of the production from Outkast's last album, and also we have Earth Tone Ideas, or Earth Tone 3, which was just kind of a production moniker for Outkast itself, teaming up with Mr. DJ. And together they would come out with an album that was completely unlike the wave of aggressive hip-hop that was coming out of the East Coast and the West Coast. Though I will say Andre and Big Boy maintained that incredibly smooth melodic sound from their debut album, which was very G-Funk inspired. And these smooth grooves and rhythms and very sweet melodies would be taken into a direction on this album that was very laid back, very smoky, nocturnal, moody, kind of mystical, with very simple percussion, subtle guitars and keys, subliminally groovy bass lines, topped with these very thoughtful and occasionally clever and cocky lyrics. And Andre 3000 and Big Boy showcase better flows on this record too. Big Boy is constantly changing his flow up all over this record, just always throwing in these triplets all over the place, and sort of completely gone is that amateurish appeal of some of the tracks from Outkast's first album. Andre 3K is coming through as just way more expressive and eccentric. He's really animated on this record, even on these incredibly subdued tracks. I actually think that's what makes many of these songs work, even though the beats are incredibly quiet and just not hooky, not poppy at all. Big Boy and Andre come through with such huge personality that it kind of makes up for it. Now, the whole album kicks off with this You May Die intro, which features what sounds like these psychedelic, ghostly jazz samples hanging in the background, gentle acoustic guitars, these beautiful harmonized female vocals, some spoken word delivering this prayer in Portuguese. Right from this very, very short intro, we know that this is going to be a hip-hop record unlike any other that would drop this year or even really in this decade. And then we get into the first full-length track, Two Dope Boys, which in a lot of ways is kind of like a mission statement, not only for the record, but just Outkast's whole vibe for the next several years. The chorus talking about how they're surrounded by people who are indulging in destructive behavior, whether it be drug use or something like that. And this could be people in Andre and Big Boy's own neighborhood. This could be about the whole East Coast versus West Coast thing that was going on at the time. But what's important is that in the chorus here, it is stated blatantly that amidst all this chaos, they just kind of stay in the middle, calm, and they're dropping bombs. Lyrical bombs. At this point to them, the aggression and the machismo of a lot of hip-hop just kind of seems, I don't know, a little tired and cliche at this point. The verse on this track that Andre delivers toward the back end of the song, he seems completely above petty confrontations, and he uses this MC, who may be imaginary, may not, who's like challenging him to kind of display, you know, just another idiot trying to, you know, get in my craw. And Andre essentially doesn't let his aggression and him kind of getting in his face get to him. Andre's always coming through as super thoughtful, philosophical. I can tell that as he's spitting, he takes what he's saying super seriously and imagines what he's saying is having some kind of huge influence or impact, not in a way where he's sort of stroking his own ego, but it's almost as if he feels some kind of heavy responsibility with the words that he's putting out, and he just doesn't simply want to, you know, just lead anyone in the wrong direction or set anyone on the wrong path. Big Boy, he can get personal too, but he's just a little more straightforward. He's a little more cocky, a little more braggadocious. He's funnier. He's dropping lyrical gems like on the title track here where he says that he's cooler than toenails on a polar bear. He's just always got these great one-liners, and there's just a mess of them all throughout this record. Meanwhile, Andre 3000, you go boy, asking for that affirmative consent right after all that clitoral stimulation. The song Wheels of Steel is a little bit of a change of pace, goes harder than many of the cuts in the track list here, and features some fantastic DJ scratching from Mr. DJ, though Andre 3000 and Big Boy do a fantastic job on this cut. It's really his cuts, Mr. DJ's cuts, all over this cut that kind of steal the show, in my opinion. On the song Jazzy Belle, which is just a kind of reworded for the word Jezebel, Big Boy and Andre 3000 go into the politics of sex with this really dreary, sour bass line and these cool, hypnotic female vocal leads. Very easygoing beat, and the lyrics deal a lot in women, love, promiscuity, being abused and used. The sex is just kind of taking advantage of one another to get up in those guts. In one breath, I see it as a little, I don't know, too eager to police the sexual choices that people make, specifically women. However, it kind of goes with a theme generally on this album, and specifically in Andre 3000's verses, where he kind of gives us this warning to stay away from excess. You know, not to just simply give it up or just have sex with anyone, not to indulge too deeply into drugs and alcohol, because as I was saying earlier, he feels he has this message that he has to deliver, and there are points on this album where he specifically says, there are points on this album where he blatantly says that he needs to have this message coming out clear so he stays sober. The song Elevators features this super eerie and nocturnal beat, one of many choruses on this record that are super subdued. These are not glitzy, punchy, hard-hitting choruses. I mean, this is an easy-going rap album. It's very cerebral, but again, the lyrics on this chorus and the singing on this chorus, me and you. The singing very much reminds me of something that would have turned up on like Kendrick Lamar's first couple of records. I mean, maybe even on one of his latest records. I guess what I'm just trying to illustrate here is that at points like this, artists like Kendrick Lamar pull a lot of influence from Outkast. Kendrick Lamar is one of the many ripples that we can hear today that are as a result of an album like this just dropping so hard into the pool of mainstream music. And what's so funny is that even though this song is so quiet and it is so subtle, it was a lead single from this album and was actually as high as number 12 on the Billboard charts. And I understand why. It's not really so much about the beat or about the chorus as much as it is about Andre and Big Boy, because again, they come through with so much personality. And Andre's verse on this cut, where he goes on about living by the beat like you live check to check, is just such a legendary set of lines that it's been sampled countless times on many hip-hop albums to come. His finishing verse deals in how the duo has grown and advanced since the release of their first album. And this isn't really the only moment on the record where Andre and Big Boi and whoever else they have on the record sort of address the music industry in some way. Like, for example, the song Mainstream, or on the song Over the Was, where Andre compares labels to pimps, but they're not fly like blimps like them. They fly like blimps. And then there are spots on here where Andre and Big Boi get incredibly personal, like on the song Babylon, where Big Boi goes on about his aunt and losing her, and she was incredibly important and influential to him. Whereas Andre goes into this verse about his early exposure to cocaine as he was a growing child in the womb. There are a lot of passionate, telling, emotional, and important moments on this album like this throughout the entire thing. It doesn't really seem like lyrically Andre and Big Boi aren't trying or putting a lot of thought into what they're saying at any point on the record. It's just that so many of these mellow, super cerebral tracks stacked on top of one another for almost an hour, it does create a little bit of a lull in the track listing, in my opinion. I do wish some of the cuts in the middle point, or at least the back half, went a little harder, sort of like Wheels of Steel, at least that punchy, even though that track, again, is not like the most hard-hitting hip-hop track on the block. However, this is a balance that Big Boi and Andre would strike much better on subsequent records, and I do get that the whole point and concept of this record, in a lot of ways, is to be super spacey, is to completely sidestep the overwhelming aggression that was prevalent in much of the hip-hop that was popular around this time. Which is why this album is so heavily influential to a lot of the spacey, abstract, super conscious rap that you find today. I mean, the album even mellows out further on the last two tracks, like on E.T., where the hook pretty much blatantly puts the music into, like, I don't know, this spacey backdrop, like Andre and Big Boi imagine their music coming from another world. And we also have the closing track, which kicks off with this very long spoken word diatribe from Big Rube, where there are a lot of religious undertones in this piece. He kind of warns, I think, of like a godless world and what he sees as paganomics. Lyrically, a lot of the themes that Big Boi and Andre circle around on this track have to do with growth and change, and sort of where they're going as artists, and sort of where they kind of see hip-hop or maybe their hometown going as a community. And we also have the little growing old mini verse at the very end of the track, which to me just kind of makes Andre seem like he's like 2 albums in, and he's just, I don't know, almost portraying himself as being way too artsy and mature for this world that he's kind of put himself in, placed himself in as a hip-hop artist, which is, again, kind of a theme that's run throughout a lot of Outkast songs and albums. I mean, right from the intro track of their next album, Return of the G, we have bars like Big Boi talking about, he doesn't want to deal with any of this G shit. He just wants to hang out with his daughter, blowing bubbles, and just like, be a good dad. Which, again, I think is another reason that Outkast is such an important group, because they made incredibly significant, influential, important, landmark hip-hop records, and they did it while completely detouring away from a lot of the pettiness that dominates a lot of hip-hop culture, and in a way creating an outlet and another lane for any other artist who wants to get into the genre and create music just simply for the art's sake. And not only with this album did Andre 3000 and Big Boi just give us great music and a great record, but they've also kind of, given us a bit of a handbook and proof that that is possible. You don't need to sell your soul, and you don't need to give up what you see as kind of your ethics or really what matters to you deeply in life in order to make music that speaks to people, that sounds great. And I think I'm gonna just end the review there, because essentially those things really are just the power that this album holds. I hope that you have given this record a listen. If you haven't, please use this review as an excuse and an opportunity to listen to it and the rest of Outkast discography as well. I hope you're doing good.
Musician, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? Eat your fruits and vegetables and drink some goddamn water. Stay hydrated forever.